Hello everybody, welcome to today's Ento Live webinar. In today's Ento Live webinar, we'll be hearing about the reintroduction of the large marsh grasshopper into East Anglia through the Hop of Hope project. I'm delighted to introduce Ben Stockwell from Citizen Zoo, who's going to tell you a little bit about that organisation, and then he's going to introduce our main speaker for this evening, which is Stuart Green. So over to you, Ben.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Kieran. And thanks to you all for coming along to what I know is going to be a really interesting and fascinating talk about a truly inspiring project, the Hop of Hope project. But before I hand over to Stuart, I just wanted to touch upon a little bit about who Citizen Zoo are and just do a brief introduction to the project itself. So just to introduce myself, I'm Ben Stockwell. I'm Citizen Zoo's Senior Urban Rewilding Officer. And for those of you who aren't familiar with what we do, we are a London-based conservation organisation specialising in the field of rewilding, but we have a particular focus on community-led rewilding. And we do this by empowering local people to get involved with species reintroductions and habitat restoration projects. And a large chunk of our work focuses on the urban realm, here in London, and this includes our flagship projects such as a waterfall reintroduction project, which has been working on a river called the Hogs Mill in southwest London in Kingston, which had lost its waterfall population back in 2017, and working with over 350 local volunteers, many of which I can actually see on the call tonight. So hello to you all. We reintroduced over 100 waterfalls back onto the river in August of last year. Which is an incredible achievement, and we've had people getting involved with everything from surveying the river for viable habitat through to monitoring for invasive American mink, helping with habitat restoration, even contributing to our fundraising efforts to pay for the waterfalls themselves. So it's a really exciting project and one that we're looking forward to continuing into the future. Also in Kingston, we've been working on the borough's largest nature reserve, Tulworth Court Farm Fields, which at 42 hectares in size is quite a sizable chunk of land. And it also sits along the Hogs Mill River as well. So it's part of that incredibly important green corridor running right the way through the borough. And because of its large size, we're really excited about the potential for applying some rewilding methodologies that are used in other rural locations, such as kind of free roaming, mixed grazing regimes, and applying it to an urban location. And just last year, we kickstarted the project by getting local people out to get involved with surveying the site to build up our baseline data. And we ran 6 survey days to look at insects on Tulworth Court Farm Fields, which is really important for building up that baseline data set, but also a great way of getting local people involved in the project from the start and helping them to inform our management decisions further down the line. And we're really looking forward to enacting some of that, our management plan going into 2023. And a third project that we're working on here in London, and incredibly exciting, because on World Rewilding Day, we were able to announce that we just received funding for this project from the Mayor of London as well. And this is for a beaver reintroduction project in a site called Paradise Fields in Ealing, which is quite unique in itself, not just because it's an urban site, but because it will be one of the UK's only publicly accessible reintroduction sites, where people will be able to access the site through a public right-of-way and experience a beaver rewilded landscape. And we really see this as being a really valuable engagement tool to getting people used to living alongside this animal within our kind of urban realm once again. And we're incredibly excited by this project. And just last month, we also received the green light from Natural England to press ahead. So we've got a target release date of this autumn, and we've got a lot of work to do ahead of then, but we're really excited to achieve that target. And yeah, stay tuned for more details, or head over to our website as well to find out more about that project. And outside of the kind of the London realm, we are working on the Hop of Hope project with Stuart, which is a really fantastic project. And like I said, one that I'm really proud to be working on. It's got the core goal to restore the large marsh grasshopper throughout its previous geographical range. But what makes this project so special is the really innovative and kind of pioneering methodology that Stuart has led on through his expertise and experience working with grasshoppers in the past, which enables local people to actually home rear those grasshoppers themselves before releasing them out into the wild. And not only does this give an incredible sense of ownership over the project by local people, but it's also been really valuable for helping us to scale up our efforts to actually restore the species across different sites. And as Stuart, I'm sure, will come on to, it's been a really effective way of getting a large number of insects back out into the wild. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Stuart, who is our lead entomologist, assistant zoo. And as I said, he is the driver behind this project really, and has been the main force behind coming up with this really incredible and innovative methodology for home rearing grasshoppers. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Stuart.
Right, well, hello everybody. Can you hear me? Is that okay? Yep, good stuff. Right, I do apologise. Part of the delay is due to my computer, which insisted on installing an update on Zoom, the most inappropriate time. But anyway, good to be here. Right, now, so I'll try and press through the talk as quickly as I can, because I realise we've lost a little bit of time. It's going to be in 3 parts. The first part is basically about the large marsh grasshopper, and we'll talk a bit about its biology and ecology. Then we'll move on to the Hop of Hope project and how it works and what it's hoping to achieve. And then finally, we'll finish up with the findings so far. It's very much an ongoing project, and we've got into a sort of an annual cycle now where there are certain things that have to happen at certain times, and it's running well, and seems to be going well. So anyway, the aim of the project then is to reintroduce the large marsh grasshopper into East Anglia. It's a collaborative project. Citizen Zoo are the lead player, but we're also working with Norfolk Wildlife Trust and Natural England, and also Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire, Northamptonshire Wildlife Trust. Okay, now, so the large marsh grasshopper, we sometimes call it the LMG, just as it's like a bit like the BFG. The LMG, the large marsh grasshopper, Stethophyma grossum. It's a sedge grasshopper. We tend to just think of it as a one-off from our British perspective, but there are 5 species of sedge grasshoppers and 1 subspecies in the wild. They all live in a belt around the northern temperate zone. So basically, it runs from the west of Ireland. Stethophyma grossum, the large marsh, is the most widespread, and it runs from the west of Ireland all the way through Northern Europe, Britain, Northern Europe, right through Siberia. And then actually, it's recently, museum specimens have been examined from Alaska, and the verdict is that they are actually also Stethophyma grossum. So the large marsh grasshopper runs right from Alaska to the west of Ireland in that sort of northern temperate zone. And the sedge grasshoppers, they like to live near sedges. They live in very wet habitats. That's they are what they say on the label, sort of thing. Right now, so the large marsh grasshopper. Look at this beautiful grasshopper here sitting on my wrist. This is a female. If you look at the end of her abdomen, you can see there's something that looks a bit like a bird's beak sticking out from the back of her abdomen. It's a wonderful piece of equipment. It's a wonderful digging tool, and she uses that to probe into the vegetation and in some cases into the soil to lay her egg pods. So this is a female. She's bigger than the male. She's got this extended abdomen. This specimen is the rarer sort of pinkish purple form. I'd say approximately 1 in 7 or 8 of the females are that colour. The males are all the standard green and yellow version. There is also a brownish, can be brownish or greyish brown female colour morph as well. So the colour polymorphism is limited to the females only. And that's quite unusual, I think, in grasshoppers. The males are always the standard colour form. And I think that possibly relates to the different sort of lifestyles of the 2 sexes. The males are much more active, hopping around from grass to grass, calling, stridulating. The females are lying low. They don't often get up very high in the vegetation. So it's the biggest UK species of grasshopper by some distance. If you know the field grasshopper, Cortipus brunaeus, this female large marsh grasshopper weighs 3 times as much as a female brunaeus. So we've got 13 species in the UK, 10 mainland British species, and the large marsh is by far the biggest. It's a handsome grasshopper. If you look at the edge of the forewing, there's a yellowy, creamy stripe at the base of the forewing on the edge there. That's very good diagnostic feature. Also, the knees of the grasshopper, it has black knees and a yellow band just in front of the black marking on the knee. There's some better pictures of that coming up in a moment. Also has a lovely red underside on the hind femur. If you look there, you can just see it, and the next photo will show it even better. Yeah, so it's an unusual grasshopper. Striking a bit, it's unusual, it stridulates in an unusual way. I'm going to show you that in a minute. And it's unusual because it's an adipodine grasshopper. Most of the, in fact, all the other mainland British species are gomphosarines. They stridulate using pegs on the inside of the hind femur, which they rub against the hind wing and make the chirping sound. Adipodines, they've got the pegs on the wing and they've got a groove on the hind leg, and they make their noise, typically, they make their noise by rubbing their legs against the wings, and the pegs on the wing make the wing vibrate. Now, the large marsh grasshopper does actually do that, not very often, but during the mating behaviour, it does produce this leg wing rubbing stridulation. But its main sort of stridulation is completely different, and it actually kicks out its heel on the hind tibia and strikes the end of the wingtip and makes a sort of clicking sound, which I'm going to show you in a moment. So that's very unusual amongst any grasshoppers. It's a strong flyer and a strong leaper and a good flyer, but it doesn't do it very often. We'll come on to that in a moment. They can be very elusive. They certainly can. If the sun's out and the temperature's up, they're easy to spot. The males are chirping. There's lots going on. If the sun's in and it's clouded over, if it's raining or if it's windy, you will struggle to find them. They're very good at hiding away. Distribution, they're limited to very wet habitats. They are the large marsh grasshopper. They live in marshes. And if your feet are not getting wet, if your welly boots are dry, you're probably not in the right place to find large marsh grasshoppers. And the reason they live here, and there's been various research studies done, and I think the absolutely main reason they're restricted to these habitats is because the eggs of this species are very sensitive to dehydration, and they need to be laid into damp soil or in the base of plants that are rooted in damp soil. If the eggs get dehydrated and even fairly short, just for a few days, then they start to die. So it's this egg sensitivity to dehydration that's the real key thing that makes them different from other grasshoppers. Now this slide here is showing the striking appearance. This is a male on the left here. He's actually just recently molted, and you can see the black knees very nicely there. Black knees, yellow band just below the knee, and then another black band on the hind femur and on the hind tibia. And when they stridulate, this is very conspicuous. They're creating a sound signal, but they're also doing a visual signal as well. They're waving their black knees. And if you look at the wing of this male, you can see there's quite a bit of interesting venation on the wing there, which we'll come back to in a moment. The middle photo shows a gravid female. Now, the previous female was gravid. She I don't know if you noticed, but the end of the forewing on the previous slide of the female had a little bit of fraying around the edges, and that's a sign that she had already laid an egg pod. When they lay their eggs, they often have to reverse in, and the wing tips can sometimes get roughed up a bit. This one, I would say by the look of her, she certainly has laid at least one egg pod before, because her abdomen is massively distended. Her ovarioles are, operating at full capacity. She's generating new eggs now, and this one will definitely have laid some eggs. If you look at her, you can see the pink coloration there, really nice. Yeah, I'm just checking my notes here. One thing I said, but basically, by the time they get to this stage, the female really is a sort of walking egg-laying machine. She's eating, she's basking, she's mating occasionally, and she's making eggs and laying them in egg pods into the substrate. She would struggle to fly by this stage. She's just too big. She could still do a leap, but she would probably only be able to walk, to leap a meter or so at the most, I would say. Whereas the male, when they leap, a young male like this or a young female who hasn't laid eggs, they can, if the wind's blowing, they can leap and fly 30 meters downwind and escape quite easily from potential predators. Good. So, yeah, the males can leap out of danger. The females, the first reaction of this female in the middle, if she was disturbed, would be to do what's happened in the third photo, and they just kind of rotate around the stem and hide around the other, pretend they're not there, hide behind the other side of the stem. She's sitting on a rush there, and you can see the red on the underside of the femurs really nicely there. She can still see what's on this side. The eyes are on either side of the rush stem there, and if a predator did come in closer, she would leap out of the way, but she'd leap down to the ground and crawl into the vegetation. So they do this hiding behavior, which is quite cute when you see it. Yeah, another thing, before I do the sound demonstration here, I don't know if you noticed, but the cuticle of the grasshopper was very waxy in the previous slides, and you know, they're well and truly waterproof. If they fall into water, they're very good swimmers. They sort of use their hind tibias as almost like oars. They row themselves into the shallows and then climb out, and you know, they can certainly deal with falling in the water. Now this is a clip which I've kindly borrowed from Roy Klukas, and this shows the stridulation pattern, and I hope you can all hear this. That's brilliant. Good. So I don't know if you noticed in that clip, but the male was always stridulating with just one leg, one hind leg, kicking it out, striking the tip of the hind wing, and it's almost always the hind leg that's furthest away from the sun. The whole life of these grasshoppers is sort of guided by this need to behaviorally thermoregulate, and they're catching as much radiant heat as they can from the sun. And so when they're sitting sideways on, like a walking solar panel almost, they sit there sideways onto the sun, catching as much on their body surface area, exposing as much body surface area as they can to get the radiant heat to raise their core temperature. And the hind leg that's on the sunny side is lying down, and it's the hind leg on the shady side that's doing all the stridulating. Yeah, so as I said, it's an unusual form of stridulation, but and it sounds like somebody using a big pair of scissors or something, really. But they do also use the pegs. They've got these tubercles on the hind wing, on the forewing, which will make a sort of chirping noise if the leg rubs against them. And they seem to do that just in the later stages of the courtship behavior, just before they jump onto the female. There is a bit of rustling and sort of more normal sort of grasshopper stridulation going on. Right, now, this is some slow motion film I made 3 or 4 years ago with Malcolm Burrows and Darren Cullen in the zoology department. They're doing a study on grasshopper leaping behavior. And this just is a fun thing, actually. If you watch this, I can't remember how slow this is, but it's very much slowed down. Whoosh, there he goes. This reminds me a little bit of Superman taking to the air with his cape behind him. Do it one more time. And the acceleration is fantastic here. And if you notice, the grasshopper gets well into the air before the wings come out. They're clearing grass level, open sky, the wings come out. Let's go to the next one. This is a female. And this female, if you look at her abdomen, it's not very big there. She probably hasn't laid an egg pod yet. And at this stage, they can still fly because they're lighter. There she goes, wings open. So they're very good jumpers, and their normal escape behavior, if they're in any sort of danger, is to leap and then flutter. And they get up and then they generally go downwind in the breeze. But they are actually very good, very controlled flyers. They can choose where they land very carefully. And as soon as they land, everything closes up and they can disappear by their camouflaged coloration. This female here on the right, she is the sort of normal standard issue green and yellow female. And she blends in very nicely. I mean, this you can see her legs are focused right, and she's right in the middle of the screen. But if you move further back, you wouldn't see her. If you look in the picture on the left side, I don't know if anyone can see the grasshopper there. I'll give you a bit of help. There she is. But they do blend in very, very well. And especially if the sun is coming in and going out, going shady, and then the sun coming out again, they tend to sort of sit just below the surface of the vegetation, behind some blades of grass, and they kind of catch the sun when it's there, but they're kind of protected by the vegetation as well. They are very hard to see unless they come right up to the surface. One of the things I should have said with the flying behavior and the jumping, they can fly very well, but they don't do it very often at all. I've only seen a proper flight by a large marsh grasshopper once, and that was actually in the very first year. And a male came up just as we released them. He climbed out of the cage, sat on the top, and then he just went, and he flew up, and he went up at least 15 meters into it was a hot, sunny day, went up 15 meters, and then he flew off. And we lost sight of him with our binoculars. They are capable of long distance flight, but that was a very unusual event, and we've not seen it before. And in the literature, there's been quite a number of papers in German journals from the 1990s and 2000s, and they all agree they can fly. They are actually a distant cousin of the migratory locust, which are well known for their flying ability. So they can fly, but normally they don't do it. And we can come back to that in a little while, maybe. So we know they can jump, we know they can fly. We know that they're well camouflaged. So basking is very, very important. And they don't really start stridulating or doing anything much until we're over 20 degrees. Strong sunshine is the best. Overcast, they sometimes make a feeble effort to stridulate, but won't do very much. And if it's very windy, that also puts them off. If it's raining, they just hunker down and you can't even find them. Good. Now let's go to the next page. So this is a typical, what we'd consider a typical British large marsh grasshopper habitat. This is a valley mire, a sphagnum bog, basically. And we kind of associate large marsh grasshopper with sphagnum bogs in this country, but it's not necessarily their only habitat. In Europe, they're found in much wider diversity of habitats. And actually in Britain, the Somerset Levels population, which recently was rediscovered, that's in more of a fen-like environment. And it's not a sphagnum bog at all. And the former sites in the Norfolk Broads were also fenland sites rather than sphagnum bogs. So we've kind of got used to this being the large marsh grasshopper habitat because that's all we've really known in this country. And naturalists who've seen them, it's always been in a sphagnum bog, but it isn't necessarily the case that that's the only habitat. Yeah, the habitats are always very wet though, and yeah, sphagnum bogs like this one have a very distinctive flora. They're nutrient poor, usually acidic, so you get a lot of sphagnum mosses, cross-leaved heath, bog myrtle, cranberry, common cotton grass, bog asphodel, white beak sedge, which is this plant on the left-hand side. And because the nutrient levels are so low, it's a good place for insectivorous plants like round-leafed sundew there. But as I say, they are also found in fens and riverine pastures in Europe, which have a slightly different flora. So long as they're wet enough, that's the key thing, really. I can remember watching, I was in the Netherlands about 4 or 5 years ago, watching a stork that was eating, it was in a sort of fen-like habitat, rather like the Norfolk Broads. And I was thinking, oh, he's having a good time. He's eating insects. And then I looked and I realized he was eating large marsh grasshoppers. And, you know, he absolutely scoffed himself. I watched him for about 10 minutes and he must have eaten 7 or 8 large marsh grasshoppers. And, you know, I think it'd be great if we got large marsh grasshoppers back in Norfolk and other places, but I hope the storks don't come because, oh, that'd be good for them, but it'll have a big impact on the grasshoppers. So, yeah, certain birds are adapted to eating grasshoppers, and a large marsh grasshopper is a very nice helping of food for one of those. So let's go to the next slide. Here we go. So this shows the current and former UK distribution of large marsh grasshopper. Now this map is from Hayes and Harding's 1997 Atlas of British Orthoptera, and it's a little bit dated because, but it is actually still good, because what's happened since this was published is that the Somerset population, the black dot there near the Bristol Channel, in 2006, no one could find any large marsh grasshoppers there anymore, and the population seemed to have disappeared. And then it slightly mysteriously reappeared in 2019. And it's been actually staging a strong revival since then. And the grasshopper numbers at some of the sites have been very, very good in that area. So it's a mystery whether it actually naturally recolonized, or whether there might have been some mischief at play here and somebody's put some out there. But whatever the reason, they've come back and they've done very well. Of course, it's not so far from the New Forest to Somerset as it is from the New Forest to Norfolk. We're talking about 200 miles from Norfolk to King's Lynn. And whether or not a natural recolonization could happen over that distance, I rather doubt it. You know, you can never say it's impossible, but it's a long way, and there aren't really any suitable stopping off places along the way. And so to get a female with fertilized eggs in her over to that sort of distance onto the site would be a big call. But who knows? Who knows in the future with global warming? We'll see. If you look on the map here as well, there are two crosses in Surrey. And they relate to, one of them at least, relates to a reintroduction that was staged in, I think, in the 1960s. And it lasted a few years. It was rather a small site, and then it did go extinct. Yeah, so these are the areas where it used to occur. Now, oops, let's just go back. East Anglia, the last record from East Anglia was in 1968 in West Norfolk. Prior to that, the Norfolk Broads had them until the start of the Second World War. Cambridgeshire lost them, you know, sort of in the 1860s, really. But I think I could almost guarantee if we went back 200 years and we were in East Anglia, in the fens or the Broads, on sunny days there would have been large marsh grasshoppers showing themselves and chirping away in the wettest places. You know, I suspect they were never very, very abundant everywhere, but in the wet places there would have been strong colonies. And of course, what the reason for the decline, the main reason, is almost certainly drainage, water drainage related to agriculture or peat extraction. But it's a little bit of a mystery what finally tipped the balance in some cases. Let's have a think. Yeah. So, of course, the thing I didn't show on the previous map is actually the closest large marsh grasshoppers to Norfolk are actually over to the right, over the English Channel and in the Netherlands. It's probably about 170 miles. There are populations in South Holland, which are actually closer than the New Forest, although the sea is obviously a bit of a barrier to dispersal in those cases. Yeah, so it seems like it was a combination of factors that led to the decline and loss of the species in East Anglia. I've put sort of land drainage, peat extraction, habitat degradation, agricultural, nutrient levels going up, fragmentation of the habitat as well, of course, is problematic. And who knows, maybe hot summers or cold summers played a part as well, and climate does change over time. Good. Some good news before we just leave the map bit. In 2017, Harvey and Brock did a survey of the large marsh grasshopper colonies in the New Forest, and at least some good news on that front was that the most of the major established colonies were actually seemed to be in pretty good health. And we've been going down to the New Forest with this project for about the last 5 years now. And it varies from year to year and summer to summer. But certainly last year, although it was a very dry summer, we probably saw more large marsh grasshoppers last year in some sites than we've ever seen anywhere before. So they seem to do well when it's sunny and hot. Now, the idea of reintroducing large marsh grasshopper into Norfolk has been around for at least 35 years. I did my PhD at UEA in Norwich in the 1980s on grasshopper ecology, and we were talking about it then. But at that stage, it really was it wasn't an option. The potential sites were much too dry for it even to be considered, and the loss of habitat meant it was a no-go. What has changed in the past 10 years, which has tipped the balance now in favour of trying to do a reintroduction, is that there has been quite extensive habitat restoration in some of the sites, and our two main sites in particular have improved considerably over the last 10 or 15 years. I can't name the sites, unfortunately, at the moment. We're going to just refer to them as, we've got 4 sites at the moment, so we'll just call them by numbers. But site 1, our main site, the water table there has been raised by about 10 centimetres over the past 10 years. There's been extensive removal of encroaching scrub as well. So we've got a wetter bog. It was getting very heathy, and now it's a really nice wet bog again, and looks very similar to most of the valley mires in the New Forest. Yeah, and our second site is also looking very much that way as well. Now, if we can successfully reintroduce large marsh grasshopper into these sites, that will be great, because the real reason for doing it is that there is a risk with climate change that the sites in the south of England, almost all of them are in the New Forest, and the forecasts are that the southern England is going to become hotter and drier as the years go on. And so if we can establish large marsh grasshopper in East Anglia, then we haven't got all our eggs in one basket. We've got extra sites a bit further north where it'll be a bit cooler, hopefully. And so we are sort of adding resilience to large marsh grasshopper survival in the UK in the longer term. Now, a good question would be, can a natural recolonisation of the site actually occur without doing a reintroduction? And I would say it's not impossible, but as I said before, it's remotely unlikely, I think, at the moment. You know, it is 200 miles from the New Forest. There really isn't any suitable habitat between here and there. And as I said before, our own experience and the findings from Germany suggest that long distance flight is a very rare event. It does happen, but it seems to be like they never fly in a swarm. It's always just the occasional grasshopper that leaps and goes away. And they're usually leaving a very good habitat, and they almost certainly won't find anything nearly as good or better. And so long distance migration doesn't really make sense. If they had a population explosion, which could happen if they had a series of really good summers and the population density went through the roof, who knows? There might be more chance of it. But I'd say it's rather unlikely at the moment. And to get a gravid female flying a long distance would be a bit of a challenge. Having said that, after the Ice Age, they were one of the few species that got to Britain before the English Channel rose. They actually also got to Ireland before the Irish Sea rose. They are a good mover. In those days, before agriculture, there was a lot more marshy wetland around, so they could have done it in a series of short hops to make that advance. Harder nowadays. In Germany and the Netherlands, there is evidence that in recent years the range of the species seems to have expanded, and that may be partly due to hot summers. So we've got this interesting situation where we don't really know what's happening. We're going to be monitoring how well the large marsh grasshopper does in its new sites, and people, I think, will become more aware of it. And there's a good chance, most serious naturalists who go out and take photos of things, if they see one, they'll think, oh, I've seen that somewhere before, and take a picture of it. I think if they do spread further, they'll be noticed very quickly and probably get recorded. So let's move on. Oh, the last point on the bottom here, on the Cambridgeshire sites, something that's worth pointing out is that they are all in what we call black fen areas, the soil with a high peat content. And this is also true for the Norfolk Broads sites. And this peat content, I think, is very important in maintaining the moisture of the soil, which is so important for the egg survival in the large marsh grasshopper. Of course, there aren't any there now at the moment, but the peaty soil is still there. And if it could be made wetter again, who knows? Now let's move on to the next slide. So, as I say, we the idea of reintroducing large marsh grasshopper had been in my head for at least 35 years, but about 6 years ago, by a series of coincidences, the team sort of came together and we came up with a plan to try and do it. And obviously, to do a project like this, you need to go by the book and get the necessary permissions. So we got involved with the Natural England, and they gave us the go-ahead. We also need to get clearance from the Forestry Commission, who manage the new forest sites for large marsh grasshopper, because obviously we're taking away their large marsh grasshoppers. They might object to that, but actually with the protocol we use with when we were there is we're allowed to collect one grasshopper for every 10 that we saw. So we were never going to deplete the population there. And we had two plans. One was to take the grasshoppers and do a straight translocation, which we did, and we introduced 15 males and 15 females to site 1 from the New Forest in this is 2018. And the second option was to see if we could get it breeding in captivity and potentially rear our own and hopefully ramp up the numbers and get breed lots and lots of grasshoppers. The sites where we collected were the ones listed here, which were listed as strong populations by Harvey and Brock, and some of them are fantastic sites with one or two of them abundant large marsh grasshoppers. The translocation day was the 9th of July 2018, and there we go. So we had 18 to put in the breeding cage, and lo and behold, we put them in there. And this is going from a wet, soggy bog, really the squelchiest habitat you can imagine in this country, into a dry aluminium box with an incandescent electric light bulb in there. How they do? They did brilliantly well. The adults are not bothered by that hot, dry environment at all. They can cope with it so long as they get fresh grass every day. They get their grass, their water requirement from eating fresh grass, and so long as they've got the fresh grass every day, they'll do okay. And we needed this to collect egg pods for rearing grasshoppers for introducing in the next year. One of the issues we were concerned about was whether we would end up inbreeding with these grasshoppers, and genetic diversity is a concern. If you're selecting for the ones that survive best in a hot locust cage, they might not be the best ones that survive when you reintroduce them onto the bog. So in order to avoid that eventuality, we collect approximately between 5 and 20 grasshoppers in the New Forest every year with permission, and we keep them in a separate cage and get egg pods from them. And then the breeding stuff, the egg pods that we keep are a mixture of pods from wild-borns and pods from our breeding stock, and then we mix them up, and the next year the eggs have wild-born and second generation eggs in them. So we're hoping that will avoid any sort of inbreeding effects. We didn't know how we were going to do. In the first year, I was thinking if we get 50 egg pods, that's going to be good. By the end of the summer, we'd got 265 egg pods. They've got roughly 12 to 15 eggs in each pod, so we were over 3,000 eggs. Great, it was a great feeling to get that. We knew we were onto something. So the grasshoppers were mating quite happily. Would they lay their eggs? Yes, they would. Now, large marsh grasshopper typically lay their eggs, like this female on the left, into the grass stems. Below the grass here is in a jam jar of water, secured by cotton wool around the side, and they go below the cotton wool level, but above the water level. That's where they lay their eggs. Some of the grasshoppers actually go for the artificial sphagnum moss that we've provided there, which is, of course, damp cotton wool, and they will happily lay into that as well, like this lady on the right. And these are some pictures of the egg pods. The ones on the left, this is when I've taken the grass out of the jar. They lay them in the sort of fluted bit within the leaf there. They're tucked in, stuck to the leaf. So the eggs are in the middle there. They're surrounded by a frothy, foamy coat which hardens off. They can lay in the soil as well. I mean, it's a bit of a myth that they always lay in the vegetation. The egg pod here on the top in the right-hand picture is one that was laid into moist sand. They won't lay in dry sand. They won't lay in totally waterlogged sand, but they will lay in moist sand. And in the field in Germany, they've been observed laying their eggs into the substrate on the bogs, and not just in amongst the plants. Yeah, good. Oviposition takes about an hour to do. So when we've collected the egg pods, they go into refrigeration in moist sand over winter, and then next springtime we do a test hatch to check the eggs are okay, and then we know we can go ahead to the next stage, which is the citizen keepers. Now, once we knew our eggs hatched, we knew we were on to winner, and we thought, let's go to the next stage. We need to recruit some volunteers, citizen scientists really, who are going to take a locust cage, take some eggs, take a large pooter and some equipment. They're going to hatch the eggs in their own homes in the locust cage and rear them, feed them every day, and rear them from tiny little hatchlings all the way to adults. And then we're going to get together and take them out onto the bog and release them. And this is a big commitment when you think about it. They need feeding every day. They need fresh grass, and we do two cohorts a summer, so we're talking 2 months really of every day feeding the grasshoppers. It's a big commitment. The people who've done it seem to love it. I mean, half of them, we've had, I think, 28 or 29 different keepers and keeper teams. Sometimes it can be more than one individual working together, and half of them have come back for a second year, and of the ones that came back for the second year, half of them have come back for a third year, and we've even got a few who've done it every year. So it's quite a fulfilling thing to do, although it is quite a commitment, and it's not something to be taken into lightly. The people they're usually people who've contacted the Wildlife Trust. It tends to be, we try to get local people from Norfolk and Cambridgeshire. There are one or two who live further away. We get them to sign a contract. There are certain things you mustn't do if you're rearing large marsh grasshoppers. Dogs with flea treatment shouldn't come anywhere near the grasshoppers. We had at least one cage wipeout, which unfortunately was due to a dog that had got the anti-flea insecticide treatment on its fur, and the grasshoppers, it's heartbreaking to see it. They just died very quickly when the dog was the dog had been coming near to the cage apparently. Also, we don't let people who have got reptile pets participate, because there's a risk that if any wild insects, locusts or crickets or anything come into contact with grasshoppers, there could be cross-contamination. We generally ask people to pay a small fee who become keepers, because we do have various costs to cover, and include the insurance and the safety check, electrical checks and things, and just the fees for maintaining the cages and everything, and petrol for getting to training days and other things. So we build up a team at the start of the year, and once we've got people in place, the first thing we do is the training day. This was our very first training day we're doing this in the Cambridgeshire Wildlife Trust headquarters, and basically it's a chance to see the grasshoppers, get a bit of hands-on, learn how to use a pooter and suck one up, and it's a crash course in grasshopper rearing, a chance to handle them and identify the best grasses, and we give out the equipment, we give out the egg pods, and then the people go home, set it all up, and we're ready to go. And it's quite exciting when you've got the eggs and you've got your cage set up. This is just they get the manual is online now, but we did originally do printed paper manuals. There's a rearing manual. We have a Facebook page, which is a great thing. It's a Facebook private group page, and it's such a good idea. Elliot and Lucas, who set this up in the first place, it was a brilliant idea to have the Facebook page, because we can communicate with all the keepers can talk to each other. There's a very good group camaraderie through it, and if anything happens, one person will say it, then they're all after it, and my eggs have hatched. They're all dying for their eggs to hatch. It's so exciting when you're all comparing notes. So the Facebook page works really well. This is the start. The eggs are there. They're in moist sand. There's a filter paper wick going down into a jam jar full of water. Sorry, water from below, heat from above. Start the clock. Usually, I've got it down to a fine art now with the pre-incubation before I give the eggs out, that they will hatch either on the 3rd day or the 4th day after the people get them. And this is one of the most glorious sights ever. This is the tiny hoppers just crawling out. They've just burrowed up to the surface. They look the colour of pasta when they first emerge, but they soon brown off. That's a still photo. They're sort of a bit soggy when they get to the surface. They soon dry out. They climb up onto we usually put a jar of grass in there. The picture on the left here, these pasta-coloured ones have just recently hatched. I think there were some hatching the day before. You can see within a day, they've actually done a fair bit of eating damage to this cocksfoot grass, which is quite a tough grass. So they can go for the heavy grass, even right from the word go when they're little. But we do tend to sprinkle in cut grass as well to start with, so that they've got some softer grasses to chew on. And then feeding every day. They soon start growing. There are usually 5 instars before we get the first adult. And you can see in the picture on the left there, on the right there, you've got some 2nd and 3rd instar nymphs. And by this stage, the grass requirement is going up a bit. So yeah, one thing you do soon learn is they've got to be fed every day. And the people in the local neighbourhood usually get a bit suspicious. What's going on here? Who is this weirdo who's walking around with a bundle of grass every morning? But once you actually, if you get a chance to talk to them, they usually say, "Oh, that's really interesting," and you become a sort of minor celebrity rather than an eccentric weirdo. And it wasn't a problem at all. But the grasshoppers do need feeding every morning. Come rain or shine, you've got to collect the grass. The egg hatch is probably the single most exciting moment. But when you get the final molt to adulthood, that's pretty exciting as well. And the final instar nymph basically stops eating. It pumps its body up by swallowing air, basically, which cracks the old cuticle, which is dried out by that stage. And then it climbs out, jumps onto a separate leaf facing upwards, pumping up the wings now. And there we go, the first adult. That's an exciting time. When that happens, the Facebook page is going ballistic. They're all sending messages and showing their proud new pets in the cage there. So that's an adult female there. And one of the things we also do, sometimes we get the keepers to mark the grasshoppers using a spot of oil paint, because this helps if we're going to do any field observations afterwards, which some years we do more than others. This allows, and if we're doing this, usually the keepers get their own individual pot of oil paint in a particular colour that is unique to them. So we know when they've released them and which site they've released them. We can work out how far they've moved from the release site. We know roughly how old they are because they're marked. Usually a week after turning adult, we release the grasshoppers. So we've got a rough idea of the age of the grasshopper. And we're amassing a lot of data on dispersal and age of grasshoppers in the wild, released grasshoppers in the wild. Okay, so that's good. So we're on to the action stage now. This was our very first, this was actually our second release. This was the August release in 2019. We all get together in the car park, and when we're all there, we walk out onto the site. This is site 1, and we've got a rough idea where we want to release them. Usually there'll be, on the main sites, there would be 3, 4, maybe 5 or even 6 separate release sites, and maybe 2 or 3 of our citizen keepers would release their grasshoppers at each of those pre-selected sites. In 2020, because of the pandemic, we couldn't meet together as a group, which was a real pain. And we did the training online, which actually worked well. And we've actually done it that way since then. But this year we are going to have a get together in person again. But we had to give people coordinates, and they would find their own site using GPS and release the grasshoppers on their own. And during the pandemic, it was actually a very it was a very satisfying thing to be doing something useful that you could do on your own, but on the Facebook group page, talk with the fellow keepers, and it was a real feel-good factor in a pretty tough time for a lot of the keepers, I think, and they felt they were achieving something, and it worked very, very well. And so these are some. I'm going to run through a few pictures. I realise we're running a bit low on time. So Sophie there's got a nice bag full. Eleanor, Matt, and myself there. Ash. This one here is site 3, which is a more sort of swampy sort of site. This one's site 2. That's Sue. Chris on the left is following the Victorian tradition of the clergy being interested in entomology. She's a vicar. She and her daughter made a pretty good effort that year. And here's Dom releasing some on site 2 last year. And you have to watch out for hitchhikers. When you've finished the release and you're ready to walk away, just check you haven't got anyone trying to hitch your lift on your trousers. Yeah, so this was the release, the first release last summer at site 2, and this was the very, very hot weekend. At one stage we thought the health and safety at the they weren't going to let us on the site because it was so hot, but luckily in the end we got the go-ahead. We were allowed to park in the shade in a works car park quite close to the release site. But if we'd had to walk like half a mile to the site, it would have been just too much. It was 35 degrees. It was boiling. So I said we've got 4 sites. This is site 1. It's a nutrient-poor acidic bog. I said it's the Valley Mire. It's our best site. It's the top priority site. And so far, we've released over 4 summers, and actually 5 with the very initial 30 insect translocation. We've introduced over 2,400 large marsh grasshoppers here. We've started monitoring the population, and I'm going to come on to that in a moment. This year, we did a very small demonstration release with Tony Juniper from Natural England, so he could release a few and see what we were up to, of 30 grasshoppers. Apart from that, we left it. We're letting it run now to see how the population does. The population density here is equivalent to some of the New Forest sites. So we think we've got enough for it to be a goer. And the idea really is let's let it run now. We're going to monitor the population. We're going to monitor the distribution and the population size and see how it goes. But it's looking good. It's increased. The first 2 years, there were rather few grasshoppers visible. Then the 3rd year, last year, the population was definitely up. And this year, even better. And I'm quite optimistic that with the hot summer we had, they will have laid a lot of eggs last year. Our second site is site 2. It's another Valley Mire, not too far from the first one in West Norfolk. And it's a little bit more vegetation on this one. If you look here, you can see lots of stems. There's a bit of Phragmites growing in there. Site 1 rather flat and open. This one a bit more reedy and rushy. Again, you need your wellies on. And this is Darren and his family releasing their grasshoppers there on release day. This is site 3, which is more a nutrient-rich swamp, really. That's the best way to describe it. Potentially interesting because it's more like some of the Dutch sites that I've seen. I think the key thing with these is if the grasshoppers can find the edge of the swamp where there's saturated ground for laying eggs in, then it could work. But in this particular bit, we're probably a little bit too far into the middle of the bog in hindsight, in the middle of the swamp. And the grasshoppers, when we came to check on them a few days later, they were still very close to the actual release site. And with hindsight, I think if we'd released about 10 meters to the left, it would have probably been better for the grasshoppers. The final site, the one that we can actually name, this is Wild Ken Hill, which is a rewilding farm in West Norfolk. It's been on Spring Watch a few times. And this site is rather different. This is a wet eutrophic pasture, but it is very wet, and there is these enormous sort of porcupines of rushes here. And we will see how we're doing at site 3 and site 4 next year. This site did dry up rather a lot. There were still wet bits, but it was probably 80% dried up. And I think these one-off very hot events could be bad news for large marsh grasshopper. We'll see how it's looking next year when we do a survey. So we've released them. How has it gone? Well, as I say, site 1, we're letting it run now. We're monitoring the population. Site 2, we're going to do another major reintroduction next year. Just looking at the numbers, so far we've introduced 1,077 at site 2. If we have a good year this year, we may let it run. We'll certainly do some population monitoring there and distribution monitoring as well. Surveys, how do we do it? Well, the way you survey grasshoppers, the nice thing with these sites is they are discrete sites, and so we know the large marsh grasshoppers are going to be roughly in the area where we release them. The method we use, ideally you need 6 or more people, and you walk in a line parallel to each other along the area. Each of the surveyors is 10 metres from the next one. We had some bamboo canes in the distance, which we marked out in reference points. And basically you walk along the length of the bog one way, and then you move along 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 metres to the side, and then come back the opposite direction. And in a series of parallel runs going backwards and forwards, you cover the whole of the bog. Took us about 4.5 hours to do it the first day. And basically, when you see a grasshopper, one person is the recorder. You record the coordinates, whether it's male or female. The best way to do the survey and the population estimate is actually to do it all in one go. We've discovered by trial and error. We estimate the population by doing what's called mark release recapture, and this is where the spots of oil paint on the grasshoppers very useful. If you do it with home reared grasshoppers, unfortunately what we found by experience is that they have a sort of hangover period after they've been released where they're not very active, and so you tend to catch very few of them when you do the second survey the second day, trying to count how many unmarked and how many marked ones you see. So you get an unrealistic high population estimate and you don't capture enough. We did 2 surveys this summer, and the second survey was with grasshoppers that were wild grasshoppers marked in the field, which slows you down a bit, but you are actually getting the genuine, real, up to speed grasshopper. And with that, we got a 25% recapture, which was more than enough to get an estimate. And based on that, we reckon that in last summer, 2022, site 1, there are roughly 350 adult large marsh grasshopper on the bog at the end of August, start of September. So that's not a bad population size for an area of this size. If we look here, this graph here, these squares on the graph are 50-metre squares, and they just show we did use a slightly different sampling method last year. The blue squares were from 2021, and the numbers are release sites where we released grasshoppers, and the sampling was focused in concentric circles around the release sites, and then general sort of searching between them, but not as systematic as we did this year, which are the red spots. But what this shows is that the grasshoppers are kind of shifting. That, we released them in sites that we considered to be really good sites, but the actual grasshoppers know better than we do, of course. And what seems to have happened is there's been the lower end of the graph here, the map, is actually the drier end of the bog. The upper end is the wetter end, and there seems to have been a general drift in a northwards direction there. Also, towards the northwest here they've spread a little bit the mid side on the left side. And the really interesting thing is there seems to be this new cluster in the top right-hand corner there, which is actually on some experimental plots. Now, this is a long-running experiment that's been going on the bog here, where they are having a mow using some sort of flailing device to get the grass down at the start, usually at the start of the summer. And this will allow more sunlight to get in and hopefully boost up the sphagnum, which the worry is a purple moorgrass, which tends to get in and take over. And so the flailing does great damage to the purple moorgrass and gives the other plants more of a chance and lets the light get through to the canopy, to the ground level, sorry. And we were finding a lot of grasshoppers at the edge where the tall grass stops in the background there, and the edge of this mowed patch was very popular. And that's something that's been commented on in other studies in the past as well. And the ground here was very soggy underneath, and we found females right in the middle of there, males as well, but most of them were at the edge of the mowed plot. So that seems to be this boundary between where there's long grass, which the males can sit up on and call, and the lower grass, where the females perhaps can get it and lay their eggs. And in the hatching time, the ground temperatures will be higher. Seems to be a good hypothesis why they like that sort of habitat. We've been collecting quite a lot of data. This male on the left is our record holder at the moment. We resighted him 44 days after release. And that's means he was probably he would have been about 5 to 7 days old when he was released. So he's 7 weeks old. He was still going strong, still calling. And we found him 140 meters from his release site. Him and there was a female who'd also moved a long way. They were both from the southern end, which is drier, and they'd moved upwards towards the wetter end of the bog. So it really is the wettest bits that the grasshoppers like. The female, she had moved nearly 200 meters after 30 days. So they do move around. The values we've got are pretty comparable with most of the studies that were published from Germany in the 1990s. So they do move around, but they don't seem to move away from the area. So they don't seem to like to fly away and leave the site. Just one other statistic. We did have one. We kept keeping an eye on how long the grasshoppers live in the cages in the rearing population, and we had one who became a celebrity on our Facebook page, Red Spot, and she actually lived for 13 weeks as an adult in the culture, which is 3 months, which is pretty remarkable. So that's given you an overview of everything we've done. I think I'll leave the questions and the quiz because we're running a little bit late. Just to finish off here, this is the sort of the original team that set things up in the photo. Ben has joined just more recently. Elliot, who's not in the picture there. It's been a good collaborative team effort. These are my two best field mates, Mark and Luke. They've been a real big help over the last 2 summers doing field monitoring and field work. And of course, we have to say thank you to all our citizen keepers who have done a fantastic job. And many of whom keep coming back to us for more. Seems to be working pretty well. So I'll leave that there. What do I need to do now?